Welcome back to the Bible in Context,
where context is king and the original author's intent drives our interpretation.
Yeah, and we finally finished up our canon discussion.
Yeah. So, kind of doing one last episode focusing on the reliability.
Yeah, we'll actually have another one next week, I think, to talk about just some final questions and a little bit of Q&A we've gotten from people. So this one here, we're just going to talk about the text critical issues, the topic that I wanted to avoid, but here we are, because this one gets very technical. It's outside of canon studies per se, because it's its own different field, but they're so closely related. I wanted to say something about it based on some recent scholarship that's been in this area. And also we just need to address the fact that, again, like we said last time, we have talked about the nature of the authoritative collection of books that we have and call our Bibles. But the specific words and letters and texts within those books and within our collection, how do we know that we can trust those particular texts or those particular things? Because there are some variants and some changes, and they've been preserved for, 2,000 years now. So how do we know that they are reliable? Because that is also something that is brought up a lot by those who want to disprove the Bible, disprove its reliability. Often with this, the data, similar to the data for canon studies, the data for text criticism is handled poorly, and we need to look at it in a responsible way. And really that, I think, will shed some light on the trustworthiness of the Bible, and I think we're going to see that it is reliable.
Okay, so what you're saying is that there are some who are very critical of the reliability of the Bible because they see variance in the early texts. Some words are different, some phrases are different.
Right, and so therefore it must all be just garbage.
You can't trust any of it then because of that. And so that's where we want to address that criticism.
So we do have some very early copies, and we don't necessarily know that we have the originals, by any means. Well, what we have are copies of the originals, or maybe even copies of the originals.
A lot of them, right?
We have a lot of those copies. Yeah, it is really cool that Craig Evans, he actually wrote a paper about the longevity of the use of different texts back in the ancient world, and he showed that a lot of the early scrolls and texts that were used were probably around for a couple hundred years in use. The original theory that scrolls and things were probably only used for like 40 years. And so if they were only used for a couple hundred years and we have text from the 3rd century or 2nd century CE, then those may have been copies of the originals, written at the same time that the originals were, just about written.
Right.
At least possibly. So these are very old texts that we have very close to the original situation of the original copies. Now, we did talk about the fact that in all of these copies that we have from the ancient world, there was a greater degree of freedom in copying. We saw the same issues. We were looking at the Septuagint and the pre-Masoretic text. We see a lot of additions in the early copies where people are, whether it's making mistakes or something like that, they are also adding things here and there to explain the narrative. And there are quite a few places where we see that. And we're going to talk about those places a little bit today, or at least name them. So, and a good example of this is in the KJV. There is the angel that stirs the water in John 5:4. And that's something that was in the Byzantine text that the KJV copied from. However, now we have we have older, more reliable texts that was not originally in the book of John. That's why a lot of your newer translations will remove that verse, because we now have better evidence showing us that it was an addition by a later scribe.
Yeah, so if you're reading through John 5 in the ESV, it goes verse 2, verse 3, verse 5. It's gone.
Yeah. The context of this one is there's the lame beggar who is trying to get into the healing waters, and we're not really given much explanation about that place in the ESV, in what is probably more close to the original text. But the text, at some point in time, a scribe added a line about there being an angel that stirred the waters up, and that's why I had healing powers. So that was just someone trying to add a little bit of context to the story, where John didn't see the need for there to be context. That addition doesn't really detract from the story. It is not really out of line with Jewish assumptions. So losing it, that's fine. It being there, it doesn't really affect anything. And that's really going to be the case for a lot of these other changes that we come across. So what are some of the other places where we see changes? What's probably the most well-known section in the New Testament that may not have been in the original text?
Probably the end of Mark.
Mark 16:9 through 21, there's this whole section. Actually, just like we said last time, it's a passage where you can derive a doctrine off of it from one passage. So based on this, you want to go play with some rattlesnakes?
Well, there's unfortunately a lot of people who have done that
and died. And also, I wonder if they were talking more so about we're being snake crushers, not so much literally handling snakes, even though Paul does that, but it plays into the typology of the snake crusher. So,
which would make,
Anyway, so
sense.
That's one of those passages where Mark does just kind of end just hanging. And so maybe someone felt the need to fill in the blank here and make it somewhat more akin to Matthew, where it ends with a better commission, all these kinds of things. But really, that text was probably not there in the original. And that's been the consensus in scholarship for quite a while. Ultimately, if we take that passage away, we don't really lose any truth other than snake handling, because we find all that elsewhere. We find the Great Commission elsewhere. We find the words of Jesus that he says in that passage. We find those things elsewhere. So there's no real concern with us losing that. And we're not losing Bible. We're actually getting closer back to what the apostles originally wrote. Same thing for John 53 through 8:11. That is the story of the adulterous woman who was caught, and where Jesus says, you who have sinned, throw the first stone. That is a passage that, understandably, it's a passage that is beloved, but it may not have been in the originals. However, do we lose any truth? Is that the only place where we see Jesus being compassionate towards sinners?
Absolutely not.
Right. So if we lose this, okay, that's, no big deal. I think this story is a great story that really highlights some truths that are found elsewhere in the Bible, so I don't have a problem reading through it, but it probably wasn't original. Same thing for Luke 22:43 through 44. The drops of blood that Jesus sweat when he was mourning in Gethsemane may not have been original in the text. That's one that may have been, or maybe a little bit alarming to people, because that's another beloved section to see Jesus' humanity sweating blood, but this may have been actually from a scribe who was trying to highlight either the drama, or they were trying to highlight Jesus' humanity against those who were saying that Jesus had no real actual humanity during his life on earth. So maybe he was trying to clarify that in a setting where he was fighting some particular bad doctrine. Romans 16, 25 through 27, that may not have been original. And then at least John 21, verses 24 through 25, maybe the whole chapter 21 may not have been original. And then we have 1 Corinthians 14, 34 through 35, and 1 John 5, 7 through 8. Those are the major sections that scholars believe were not original to the New Testament.
Yeah. And your modern translations will usually have a footnote that let you know that, okay, this passage is not in some of the oldest manuscripts, or not in all the manuscripts. And so and I appreciate that they're just being honest to what we know right now.
Yeah, so hopefully this shouldn't be a shock all that much as you go through your New Testament. It might be a little bit because we're naming all these texts together, and it sounds like a lot. It sounds like we just named a lot of chunks. Yes, we did name quite a few, but it's a handful of verses, really, a couple chapters maybe. But out of the entire New Testament, if we're missing, 3 chapters worth of verses, have we distorted the gospel? Have we lost truth? Or are we just probably losing some, again, reapplication of the same truth?
Right. Yeah. There's nothing that you'd be losing as far as the core of Christian doctrine.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side, this should encourage us a little bit, because the additions that these scribes were making, they seem like they knew the scriptural tradition pretty well.
They knew it well enough to
dupe all of us.
Yeah, dupe all. Yeah, we thought that was part of the original manuscripts.
Right. They were putting things into the narrative that gave actual clarification or addition to the text that was in line with what was already there. So this shouldn't really be alarming that there are additions, because most of the time it was just explanation. Even Bart Ehrman will say that a lot of these additions did no changes to the actual meaning of the text. Also, the fact that they're gone causes no change to the meaning of the text.
Mm-hmm. I do think it's interesting in the ESV, when you come to the Mark 16 passage, it's not just a little footnote.
Yeah, they bracket off.
That section, because I think it's because there are some who have used this to create a whole doctrine of snake handling.
Right. That's kind of our state. I think we're known for that, right?
The eastern part of the state. Yeah, I've got friends who have gone to revivals where they were handling snakes.
Gotcha. So yeah, ultimately, all of these texts, their presence or subtraction does not change the meaning of the text, and that's important. Now, How do we know that there are these missing chunks? Some of it is the literary breaks within these sections that kind of clue us in that these are additions, but also we have, like we said, a lot of early manuscripts from all over the ancient world. And so with that being the case, we're able to compare all of the different texts that we have, and we're able to tell which ones have additions, which ones have misspelling, which ones have wrong words, which ones have subtractions, and get very close back to what was the original. And again, just if you think about this, if you take a piece of paper, you write a sentence down on it, and then you give it to, 100 different people to copy, you can probably look at all the little differences and mistakes that all those people make and then get back to the original because, a mistake is unique. What should be consistent is the original message. And so if someone changes a word to something that's synonymous and that is in one of those 100 pieces of paper, or maybe two of them, if they happen to guess for the same synonym correctly, if they both decided to change the word, well, then you got 98 copies that have the correct word, and so you know which one's correct.
Yeah. So having the numerous copies is actually better than having what we think is the original, because it wouldn't be hard to ever prove that you have the original.
Right, and that's what that's a very strong theme in the recent trends in New Testament criticism and really just biblical criticism overall is that we're never going to reach the original text. And that's true, technically. We don't have the originals, and there will always be little things that we're trying to figure out, like, is this right or not? But we're pretty dang close. To a layperson saying that we're never going to find the originals, that sounds like, oh, the Bible's it's shot. You can't trust it at all. The text is completely corrupt. And that's the piece of data that people will run with to try and say the Bible is corrupted and you can't trust it. But what they're ignoring is, that one word in this piece of paper was corrupt, but the rest of the sentence was correct. And we compared it to other pieces of paper and saw that one word is the wrong one. So we know what's original to a very high degree. And that which we don't know is inconsequential.
Exactly.
And again, even if you do find something that is corrupt to the point of having a different doctrine, well, you found the new doctrine, be suspect, but you're not going to find that. That has not been something that's been a problem in textual criticism. Even Bart Ehrman, which he's a good New Testament scholar, he also likes to phrase things in such a way to cause alarm over the reliability of the biblical text. But even he says that if he and Bruce Metzger, which was his mentor, who is a Christian New Testament scholar, very respected in the field, he says that they would only probably disagree on maybe a dozen places. And that's just like single word changes or small things that would really probably have no effect on the meaning of the text. So ultimately, these errors, they are easily detectable through comparison of texts, or they are very obviously mistakes. Just like if someone types, there's three different theirs. There's, T-H-I-E-R, T-H-E-R-E. If you put the wrong one in a sentence, it's very clear that this doesn't fit the grammar. You made a mistake.
I always make that mistake.
Yeah. So the last thing to bring up with the text criticism issue is I just want to bring up the work of Gregory Lanier, and you can find his work in our transcripts where we have all of our sources. He has written an article where he compares some editions of academic text critical Bibles and shows the amount of changes between these Bibles. So back in 1881, the Westcott Hort Greek New Testament came out. And so this was almost 200 years ago. 150 years ago. And since then, we've had the Nestle-Aland come out. We've had the SBL Greek New Testament, the Tyndale House Greek New Testament, and also the ECM, which is the Editio Critica Major. So you would think that from a work 150 years ago, there would be a lot of changes because we've found a lot of New Testament texts since then. And we've found some of the oldest New Testament texts we've ever found since Westcott and Hort. And so you think there might be a high degree of changes between the Westcott and Hort and the ECM or the Nestle-Aland, which are kind of the standards currently for academic Greek New Testaments. And when they compare the Westcott Hort Nestle-Aland 25, which was a few years out of date, I don't know why he compared to the 25 instead of the 28, because he does compare to the 28 later, but there is 99.2% agreement between those texts. So a 0.7% disagreement. And he's looking on the level, he's not looking at just, accents and small letter changes. He's looking at actual word changes. But even the word changes he's looking at, some of those are synonymous. So even some of these are completely inconsequential. Same thing for between the Nestle-Aland and the ECM. He compares those. Between the Nestle-Aland 28 and the ECM, there is 98.5% agreement, even though they use different methodologies. Same thing between the SBL and Westcott and Hort, 98.8. The Tyndale House Greek New Testament and Westcott and Hort, 98.4. He compares the Nestle-Aland and ECM to the Vaticanus, Codex Vaticanus, which was written in the 4th century. and that it has 96.3% agreement, which still, that's pretty high. It's 3.7% disagreement. That's not very much, especially since a lot of these cases are synonymous word usages. So ultimately, the point of this is that we have uncovered a lot of new and text, even older than Codex Vaticanus, in the past 150 years since Westcott and Hort was written, and there's still a very high degree of agreement between those texts, even though they have different methodology. Most of the text critical work being done is related to the Greek New Testament apparatus, which is basically the footnotes talking about different possibilities for what may be in this verse or what someone else found in a different text, even though they know it's wrong, that kind of thing.
So what you're saying is we can be very confident that what we have in our modern day Bibles is accurate.
Yes. Boiling down all those numbers and all that acronyms and garbage I just said. Yeah, you can believe your Bible. That's basically the gist. Something just as a bonus, it's kind of cool. He compared Ralph's Septuaginta to the Göttingen. I don't know how to say that one, honestly. Septuagint, a more recent critical edition, and even those also have a 98.5% agreement. And Ralph's Septuaginta was intentionally supposed to be a preliminary Septuagint that he put together and later scholars were supposed to evaluate, but it still was pretty good. Anyway, our confidence in our text should be very high because the textual evidence we have is very good. And even using different methodologies, we're coming to very similar results. And even the differences that we do show are often between synonyms.
Sounds like we have a Bible that is reliable.
Yep. So we've been through the canon now. We've been through the text critical issues, just enough to kind of give some highlights and just talk about its reliability, make sure that we've at least covered that base. And so we will talk about some reflections on the canon next time and wrap up.
Sounds like a plan.
Awesome.